Hi, Jim Roddy here from the RSPA. Wanted to chat with you for a minute before we start today's podcast to make sure you're aware that registration is open for Retail Now 2026, the Retail Technology Channel's #1 trade show, education conference, and networking event. Join RSPA and Retail IT channel leaders live and in person July 26th through the 28th. It'll be here before you know it in Las Vegas at the new Caesars Forum Convention Center attached to Harrah's and the Link Hotel. With nearly 200 exhibiting organizations, Retail Now will be one-stop shopping for VARs and ISVs. And with an expected 1,600 or more attendees, it's the place for extreme industry connectivity. Across just 48 hours, you'll meet new partners and new solution providers who can accelerate the success of your business. If you're serious about the Retail IT channel, you have to act now and you have to attend Retail Now 2026. Again, July 26th through the 28th in Las Vegas. Retail Now is where the industry meets. For all the details, visit the Retail Now website today at gorsp.org/retail now. That's gorsp.org/retail now. We hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoy this special episode featuring a Retail Now speaker. Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we talk with leaders in the Retail IT channel about their leadership journeys and what they've learned along the way. In this episode, we'll talk with Andy Szanger, the Director of Strategic Industries at RSPA member CDW, where he's been a team member for over 31 years. He's regarded as a top retail IT thought leader and has presented at NRF's Big Show in New York 7 times. And this summer, he'll be one of several retail IT channel industry experts presenting at Retail Now 2026, July 26th through 28th in Las Vegas. And he's part of a breakout titled What Enterprise Buyers Need from VARs and ISVs. Andy, welcome to the Trusted Advisor.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me here today. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, right back at you. Our paths have crossed from times, but I'm glad we get to dive in and talk in depth. So before we talk leadership in particular, I'm hoping you can help our listeners and viewers better understand both you and CDW. So like CDW is not the typical RSP member. So can you talk, where does CDW fit in the retail IT channel?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jim. I feel sometimes we are in a pretty unique space when we're at some of the events, and I think we have a unique value proposition because we really sit between the customer and a lot of the vendors out there, and so we have a broad selection of products and solutions as well as IT services to help support our clients. And so we really work directly with our clients on everything from strategy to ideation and design to procurement, staging, deployment, implementation, integration, and even ongoing managed services to support every area of their business. And I think, we have a significant services business that spans across end user services, infrastructure business, but also a lot of things that I think a lot of people don't realize. For instance, we do a lot of work with commerce platforms. We help out with PCI compliance. We're actually a QSA, which is something that a lot of people probably don't realize. We help with key injection services and really every area of the retail business. And I find that after being here for over 30 years, many people have, a very limited view in some cases of who CDW is and what we do. And in many cases, it's an outdated view where they think of us as someone who is, some cases, some people even think of us as a distributor because we're so large. Sure. But really, we are working directly with retailers, helping them to use technology as a competitive advantage for their brands.
Got it. Thank you for that. And it seems like the challenge when we've talked to resellers over the years, no matter how big like you or how small, is their customers or partners know them as one thing. And then that understanding never moves from year to year. Like you have to constantly update them on what you're doing. It sounds like that's a big challenge for CDW. Like you outlined a lot of things, and I bet a lot of our listeners are like, I didn't know that they did that. Is that an understand? Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. As a leader at the company, we joke a lot of times. We'll go along on a meeting, and it's very rare for us to leave a meeting without someone saying about something we spoke about. Oh wow, I didn't realize you do that. And it's tough because we do touch so many different areas of the business. So that's part of the job that we do is to try to make sure that we're educating people on what we do and how we partner together to help drive the industry forward.
Got it. Interesting. Well, thank you for level setting that for everybody. So, talking about you individually. So, when I was preparing for this discussion today, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, right? That's the new way that you research people. Two items really jumped out to me. The first was a description of you as a retail AI strategist. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's here and what's around the corner for AI and retail from your perspective. But the second one that jumped out to me is said you attended Berklee College of Music. Now, I haven't fully investigated this, but I suspect the Berklee music to RSPA member pipeline isn't a very well-traveled path. And so which of those do you want to dive into first in terms of your AI background or the music background? I'm curious about both.
Yeah, why don't we start with music, I think, because that kind of leads into a little bit of my origin story about how I wound up here, actually. So, absolutely correct. I went to Berklee College of Music. I'm a lifelong musician. My grandfather was a musician, so he played drums in a jazz band. He was in World War II on an aircraft carrier, and at nights when he wasn't tending to his duties, he played in a jazz band to entertain his fellow, his fellow military comrades. And so when I was about 5 years old, he put a pair of drumsticks in my hand and started teaching me how to play jazz. So I grew up playing. Of course, as any young adult would do, I migrated from jazz over to rock. And, I was off and running and played in bands my whole life, went off to Berklee, had an amazing experience there playing and wound up, coming home. And unfortunately, my father passed away along the way while I was still in school. And so I kind of dove more into work and a career. But at the time, I was playing in a band. We got signed by a record label. We were touring and opening for some amazing bands and played, some of the great rock clubs of all time, like CBGB's in New York and the Stone Pony in New Jersey and all across the country. And at the same time, a few of the guys I was playing in a band with actually were working in the technology industry. I, at the time, was working in retail. And, long story that we could get into another time, but I was working as an assistant store manager in charge of operations. This is back in the early 90s. And Walmart had moved into the Northeast and started putting a lot of companies out of business. I don't think I need to tell anyone that story. But I was there during that time, and the senior vice president of our company came down to close down our location. And I wound up spending about 10 days with him, walking the store and kind of helping him understand some of the things that were happening. And he took a liking to me and took me under his wing. I was fortunate. He asked me to come work for him directly. What I didn't realize I was signing up for at the time was to actually be the guy who was going around to a lot of different stores evaluating whether to keep them open or shut them down. And quite honestly, something I was completely unqualified for at the time, but it taught me so much about the retail industry and what's important to a retailer and how to evaluate the business. And so that led me, as I eventually realized I was going to manage myself out of a job at some point. I went and worked with a few of the guys I was playing in a band with, and I used that knowledge that I learned during those years to really lean into the retail industry and translate how those experiences translated into how to use technology as a competitive advantage for brands and help them innovate based on the experience that I had working in retail. So it does kind of come full circle. So I thought maybe it makes sense to start there. But happy to talk more about that as if you have any questions.
Yeah, it's interesting, just the serendipity of life, right? The way they say man makes plans, God laughs in that regard. Like, who would have thought one thing led to another? But it just shows if you put yourself out there and you got your head on a swivel, right, you're going to find the right path for you. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but it was,
no,
by
100%.
getting out there.
I think that if you would have told me 30 plus years ago that this is what I'd be doing today, I would have laughed. I actually, the first few times my friends asked me to come work with them, I told them, first of all, I'm not interested in technology. And second of all, I'm not interested in sales. Now, I was pretty young at the time. And, what I learned, though, once I dove in, to your point, is that it all made sense to me, right? I really enjoyed learning about the technology and figuring things out, and then realizing the impact I can make on other businesses, and really, it really turned into something that I'm passionate about, and figuring out technology and how to help others understand how they can use it. So I think it is. And I'm a big believer that, everyone is going to have challenges and things that come up in life, right? And it's about how do you respond to those challenges and what do you do with that, right? You can either, recoil and, kind of, shrivel down and be a victim, or you can kind of stand up and say, okay, this is what I have. Let me figure out how do I make the most out of what's presented to me and make an opportunity out of sometimes what could be diversity.
Yeah, so that could be a perfect transition into the second part of the question was about, your role as a retail AI strategist. We see some folks talking about, it's going to ruin, and they give this long list of things that it's going to ruin. A lot of folks see it as an opportunity and they're seizing that. So what's your take on, again, what's here and what's around the corner for AI in retail and in the retail IT channel?
Yeah, it's funny that you call that out because I did not too long ago update my LinkedIn profile. I felt like after 30 years, it was time for a refresh on there, and it's probably one of the pieces of information that's on there that I'm least comfortable with.
Okay.
Just because, and not that it doesn't fit, and not that I can't live up to it, but it's just one of those things that it is so new that it almost feels a little unnatural. But at the same time, after all the conversations I have, with people all day long, that's really what I talk about, for a good majority of the conversations. It's what every retailer is talking about. It's what other people in the industry are talking about, and everyone's trying to figure it out. And, I've had a few people, really kind of tag me with that title. And so I kind of was like, so I kind of leaned into it a little bit. But the reality of it is, I think that people are trying to figure out what's real, what's noise, and there's a lot of noise, right? If you go back 2 years ago at NRF, I think that everyone was trying to be a part of the AI movement, and that's still the case, right? But 2 years ago, I think if a company didn't, have an AI solution, or if AI wasn't in their name, they were adding .ai to the end of their name just to make it sound like they were part of the story.
Right. Or highlighting AI in the word retail in their booth.
Exactly.
Like, see, look at us, like AI. So.
Yeah. There's even some really big brands that did that I would call out. But I think when you fast forward to the year after that, there was still a lot of that noise, but people were trying to, they're starting to sort through that noise and figure out what's real, because all those promises and claims that people made the year before, just weren't coming true. And so you're starting to figure out what can actually be done. And now I think where we sit, people are starting to see an ROI. They're starting to recognize benefits from it. And to your point, there's a lot of fear about AI. I think that, people don't understand it. And I know that you had Zach Cass, I think, recently on one of these podcasts, and I don't know if you had a chance to read his book.
It's on my shelf. I haven't read it yet, but it's next on the list.
Highly recommend it to everyone watching this, and not just because he was on a previous podcast here, but great book. I read it myself, and I've seen him speak a few times, and he makes a great point in the book. And that is that there's a difference between what the technology is ready for and what the people are ready to let it do. And he calls it the difference between the technology gap and the societal gap, and that adoption and readiness. And I think that we're still in a place where, in general, people are using AI. They're trying to figure out how to AI, but there's a lot of apprehension around what it means for the future and how it'll be used. And will it replace my job? Will it replace me? And the reality of it is that I think the companies that are implementing AI most effectively aren't looking to get rid of people. I think there's a lot of stories in the news that add to the fear, because some companies are doing layoffs and claiming that it's because of AI. The reality of it is those companies that are most effective are actually using AI to augment the work that their people are doing. And there certainly will be some people that lose their jobs. I don't want to minimize that, because I'm sure there's some people sitting out there that may have lost their jobs to AI. But that shouldn't be the goal of companies. It's about, how do I make my people more effective? Because at the end of the day, the people are the competitive advantage of really good brands, right? It's that individual thought. So how can I take those meaningless tasks off of people's plates so that they can do more meaningful work? In retail, it's, how do I get my associates to spend more time with my clients? In the sales space for any of the bars and even the ISVs watching, it's about, how do I automate those tasks that are taking my teams away from selling to their clients or assisting their clients and doing their engineering work? And so I think that's really what everyone's trying to figure out, is how does this really impact my business, because when there's too many companies and boardrooms out there that are trying to force a use case of AI and trying to force AI to be used in their organization without understanding what they're trying to achieve and really how to use it.
Amen. And that's if I can plug a few things that tie in with what Andy was talking about. The book by Zach Cass is called The Next Renaissance: AI and the Expansion of Human Potential. The podcast that he was a guest on was 153. And then also, if you want to dive into more about AI in the retail IT channel and more the practical ROI that Andy was talking about, just Google RSPA AI Resource Hub, and you'll see a resource that was put together by a few dozen of our members there. So, well, thank you for taking us down that path. And then tell us about your role at CDW. So it says on your LinkedIn profile again, my work sits at the intersection of technology, strategy, and execution. Before we talk about, your leadership philosophies and practices, what are your responsibilities so folks know, like, what are you doing day to day, week to week?
Yeah, so I lead the teams that are responsible for developing our industry strategy, for identifying and developing new industry-specific solutions and services, and providing industry expertise directly to our clients as well as our internal teams, and in many cases our partners as well. And so my entire team is hired directly out of the industry. Now, retail is my primary passion and my primary focus, I would say. But my role is actually larger than that. So I have a retail team, but I am also building out teams for other industries as well. So we'll stay focused on the retail, case here, because again, that is really where my background was, and the work that I do in other industries was based on the foundational work I built, for retail. But we spend a lot of time directly with clients, talking to them about what they're looking to achieve and their strategy, and again, how to use AI and other technologies to achieve those business objectives and solve their challenges. We spend a lot of time with our partners, many of them which are RSPA members, talking about what we can do together to help drive the industry forward. And we also spend time with associations like RSPA and the NRF and other industry associations to make sure we're staying on top of the pulse of what's happening and ultimately trying to raise the level for everyone, right?
Yes, and does it help? Like, I can say this from being in my magazine publishing days, we had a retail channel magazine, and then we had all sorts of other like enterprise end user healthcare. A lot of it didn't apply, but there was some stuff that you could kind of help you see around the corner. Like the managed services world was always a couple steps ahead technology wise of the POS world. Do you see that at times where there are things that you get from your teams or your experience in other verticals that help you, stay a step ahead in the retail space? Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we look across different industries, you're going to find that most industries have some similar problems. There's nuance to how those, surface within those industries, but a lot of, most companies are facing a lot of the same challenges. And I think there are some great use cases across different industries. If we just think about, a few of them, clearly a lot of retailers are also manufacturers, and manufacturers are retailers, right? In their business, you have a lot of direct to consumer, manufacturers and things of that nature. So there's a ton of overlap there. But then you have, even if you think about other industries that may not feel as connected, we have teams around healthcare, we have teams around finance. And when you think about, some of the different interactions that happen in a healthcare organization, they have a retail component to them, right? So when you go into a hospital or a doctor's office, there's a check-in process that very tightly correlates to what you might have as a checkout experience in retail. And the same thing in finance and banking. You have retail banking. And so I think there's a lot of the similarities in how we can think about the technology and solving, those business problems.
Yeah, and this would be like a plug for our members to lean on your larger partners who might see into those other industries, like your distributors and some of these hardware manufacturers, or like the CDWs of the world, because they're going to see some things that you wouldn't have a view into as your, very niche and vertical focus. So, all right, Andy, let's talk about your leadership style. And oftentimes people describe what their leadership style is. I'd like to know what yours is, but then also what are some actions that you take when engaging with your team to reinforce that leadership style? What's your style and what are some things you do?
Yeah, I think as most of us are, I think, certainly not one set style, right? I think it crosses over a couple of different styles. I think if I had to, pick just, limit it down to one or two, I'd probably say it sits somewhere between visionary and servant leadership. I've built my career a lot around developing new programs and new ways of doing business. The team that I'm on right now, or that I'm leading right now, I should say, is one that I developed and was asked to actually launch based off of some work that I had been doing within the organization as more of a side project and passion project. And I also helped to launch other large initiatives within the company. So, I like to think that I come to, different situations with a point of view and an opinion and a vision about where we should go, but always try to keep at the same time an open mind and point of view on the fact that I may not have the best ideas. I have ideas, and I'm going to add, value to the conversation, I hope. But I'm always willing to listen to other ways of doing things and listen to my team members about what we can do differently and better. And so that servant leadership comes into play because I'm always looking for ways to integrate my team's feedback and work with them. Because at the end of the day, those folks that are on the front line are the ones that are seeing the business the most clearly, right? They're facing the day-to-day challenges. They're understanding what they're interfacing with clients directly nonstop and understand what they're looking for. And so I think as a leader, we need to set that vision and set that strategy, but also be very open to that feedback and integrating it into what we do. And so I make it very clear for every person on my team that when we're talking about something high stakes, I will tell you my opinion. I will tell you what I think we should be doing, but feel free. This is a safe space to challenge me and talk about. I want to have your opinion. And I hired you because of the fact that you have a point of view, that you bring a unique perspective and skill set that perhaps I don't have. And we always need to be looking for ways to improve and do things differently.
And so if I'm understanding what you're saying, you have to walk in. You can't just be like, hey, whatever you guys want to do. Like, I'm just here to, like, I got a pen in my hand. But it's also have the humility and be very overt in your communication. Yeah, I'm going to come out with this idea, but I do not want, oh, Mr. Szanger, another one of your wonderful ideas couldn't be any better. Like, you want folks to play the role of skeptic and share their perspective. Like, do you overtly state that? Like, you can't be subtle about it from understanding. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say it's a cross section between that visionary and servant at the same time, which may, contradict itself to a certain point, right? But I think it's finding that balance between the two. I think you have to set the vision, be able to express that vision and actually get that followership of your team. But at the same time, make it clear that this is a journey. And those folks that are the closest to the customer and closest to the business add tremendous value in that feedback loop to make sure we're constantly evolving and constantly staying on top of where we need to go next.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Let's talk about a specific experience from earlier in your career, something that shaped you as a leader. And can you share with us one story that has really stuck with you and shaped you as a leader over the years, something that was like really formative in your career?
Yeah, and over 31 years, there's a lot, and that's just on the IT, on the strategy IT and side of the house, and let alone the retail side. So there's a lot I can pull from, but I think one thing that really will always stick in my mind, and is that early on, probably, and I have to go back through my memory here, but I think it's probably about in my first 10 years, I would say, of being on the IP side of things, we went through, I actually started at CDW through an acquisition of a company called Micro Warehouse and Mac Warehouse. And at the time, they were one of the largest companies in the industry. I think we peaked out at about a $2 billion revenue company. And along the way, though, there were some missteps. And they started having some struggling and had a massive layoff. Mm-hmm. And I was a sales manager at the time. And it'll always stick out in my mind because it was a significant layoff that I had to manage through. And we laid off a bunch of people from my team and other teams. And the way that it was handled, quite frankly, wasn't the greatest. So the way that what happened during the meeting was, or the day, we got notified as the leadership team that there was going to be a layoff, and we got called in and we're told that there was going to be a meeting midday, and that we would get a list shortly before that of which of our coworkers to actually tell to join a meeting that was in a conference room. And so what happened was the managers went around and told their sales teams which ones of them were needed to go to a meeting with our human resource department. And then following that, some of the sales directors came around and told the manager, oh, by the way, you should go join your team.
Oh, geez.
And then the VP came around and told some of those directors and said, hey, you should join that meeting as well. And not a great experience to manage through. Now, luckily, I wasn't one of those people. But I think it distinctly sticks in my mind, and I'm sure you can relate to why, because it wasn't, it was not a good way to handle it, quite honestly. And what stuck in my mind is, the importance of communication and transparency. There is such a better way that situation could have been handled, right? I understand, there are certainly times that you need to have confidentiality and you can't share all the details that you want. But through my career, I've really led with a philosophy of share what you can in a way that you can.
Yeah.
And I've always told my teams, if you ask me something, I'm not going to lie to you. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. I'll tell you I can find the answer, but I'm not going to tell you something that's false. And if I can't tell you the answer, I'm going to tell you I know the answer, but I can't tell you that answer, because there will be times where I need to do that. But what I won't do is lie to you or mislead you. And I think that comes largely from that lesson of how that scenario was handled. And ultimately that company continued to spiral a little bit, and CDW was gracious enough to come in and actually acquire select assets of Micro Warehouse, which I am lucky enough to be one of those select assets. And I could tell you the culture at CDW has, just been nothing short of amazing. And that's why I'm here for 31 years now. And I have a lot of peers who have also been here for a really long time. So I'm lucky to be where I am. But I learned a lot through that process of going through some rough patches at some companies I worked for.
Yeah, and so it's interesting you bring that up, because I had to do layoffs as well, being in the publishing industry around the Great Recession. And there was actually a company that we bought, a web company, and one of the people that we brought on board was an HR person, and she's like, "I've developed the skills that I can lay off 6 people at the same time." And we're like, "Do you really want to do that? Like, that seems like something you wouldn't want to do." But we had to go through some layoffs, and that is, I actually, they let me bring some intellectual property with them when I left the company. I still have a folder, and I can point to the box that it's in. It's titled LO. It didn't say layoffs, but it was LO. It was my code, and that's where I kept stuff in there. I still have those documents because, like you said, and it sounds like what you're talking about is, it's not the business strategy point of it. It's the treating people like people, being human, being caring, because that's not only going to impact the person who's leaving, it's impacting the entire culture. That's what it sounds like. It really shaped you as a
100%.
leader to make sure you're treating people the way people should be treated.
Yeah, absolutely. And never forgetting about that human factor, right? At the end of the day, we're all here trying to provide for our families and make better lives for ourselves and our family, and hopefully future generations, right? It's easy to forget that sometimes when you're caught up in the business, and especially when you're facing hard times as a business. And at the end of the day, we're all here, people trying to provide. And leading with a heart is I think important.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being willing to share that. So that was something that influenced you. Can you talk about this? Will sound like it's a really negative podcast. All right, building on the layoffs. Can you tell us about maybe a mistake that you made as a leader and what you learned from it? And again, it can be recent. It can be from a long time ago. It can be a colossal disaster, or it can be just something where you fell short of your standards. Curious if you can talk about that.
Yeah, no, I think I could even, build upon what we just spoke about a little bit, because, during those times, obviously following that, as I'm sure since you've gone through it, it doesn't immediately, that layoff doesn't stop the bleeding, right? It very rarely does it. If you're there's a lot of different reasons why you're doing layoffs, and job, we can call it what it is, but it's a layoff, right? There's a lot of different, more polite names we could probably use for it.
Reduction in force. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, sometimes companies are doing it proactively to get the balance sheet right so that you are, strong going forward. And that's always the hope. But in some cases, you're too far down that path, and it's going to be a series of issues, following that. And so, I was a pretty young manager at the time when I, was going through some of this. And following that, I think we had a pretty tough stance on performance management, and really holding the line on making sure we were holding people accountable because of the fact that we had some financial issues. And so there was a time where, we had people on performance management. And I think, being a young leader, I didn't, even though I learned a little bit through that layoff and what we just discussed, I was still a young leader and developing my point of view and my skill set. And I think as we went through some of that work and performance management, I didn't take enough of that human aspect into my leadership style at the time. And I'm not saying we shouldn't hold people accountable by any means, right? There has to be a level of standards, there has to be accountability, there has to be performance. That should go without saying, right? In a performance culture. But at the same time, I think it's as a young leader, especially, and hopefully, people mature to realize this, but being too focused on the mission and not enough on the people behind the mission can be a major miss and a major fail. And so I had a situation where I had a few people that were underperforming, and I was coaching them and having conversations with them, at least, at the time I thought I was. But looking back, there was one individual who worked for me that just wasn't getting it done. They weren't showing up on time. They weren't hitting their numbers. I knew they had some personal issues, but we really didn't talk about it much. And what I found out later is that the person's had a brother who recently passed away, and he was really struggling with it. I didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah.
And it was too late. I was too far down the path and too young of a leader to really get out in front of that. I gave him every opportunity I felt to tell me, what was going on and how I can help him. He never brought any of it. I learned out after he left, though, that he had recently lost his brother. And I guess in hindsight, I feel like I didn't give him the safe place to feel comfortable enough to talk to me about that. And again, we're not there to be people's friends. We're not there to, be their life coach in general. But at the end of the day, we are, right? Like, we need to work with our people. We need to do what we need to do and have those honest conversations with them to get the most out of them and to help them be the best version of themselves that they can be and help coach them through rough times. And so again, not saying they shouldn't be accountable, not saying there shouldn't be expectations, but understanding how to have a human conversation with someone about what they're dealing with and how to help them through that. I think is something that I learned, that having that personal connection with someone can really help get the most out of a person and help them be the best person they can be.
Yeah, I hired somebody who was about 20, 25 years older than me back in the day. I remember her sharing with me, I always called it my Aunt Martha's big toe. She said sometimes the biggest thing going on in that person's life is their Aunt Martha has a problem with their big toe. And if you don't understand that's impacting them, then you're not going to be able to work with them appropriately. So I've always had that in my mind. So like, what do I care about Aunt Martha's big toe? But it might be the number one thing in their life. And it's better that you find out about that. That's kind of what it sounds like you're saying. So
you don't know what other people are dealing with, right? And again, at the end of the day, we are business leaders. We need to have, performance, but this is a people business, right? And the people are the one that are going to make your business successful. So getting to know your people, getting to know what's happening with them. And again, not saying you should be their best friend, not saying you should be intrusive into their life, right? There's boundaries you need to have. But treating them like a human being and working with them to really understand what we can do to work together, especially when you have someone that has the potential to be a really good employee. And in this case, I'm not sure, right? I was a young leader, and as a young leader, you're often trying to assert yourself in that authority, and you're also trying to achieve the mission, improve yourself. And, looking back those many years, I realized that I probably could have had a more human side to me, right? That worked with my people.
Yep. And before we take a commercial break, just a recommendation to all of our listeners, the book Everybody Matters by the late Bob Chapman. He talks about that. He talks about in episode 125 of this podcast, he calls it ethical capitalism. And like everybody, he learned about managing people, Andy, but he's like, you don't manage people. Like everybody is somebody's beloved son or beloved daughter, and you should treat them that way. And he said that influences everything, how you interact with people. So
and I'll just add to that is that one of the leaders at our company once said, how would you be proud if your child heard about your meeting interactions or something that happened at work? Would you be proud to share that with your child? And that kind of just, I think speaks volumes. Like, how do you feel? How would you feel if your family knew about how you're handling business at work?
Amen. Amen. Very, very well said. They're not in the room, but pretend they're in the room. So we're going to pause here briefly to let our listeners and viewers know about the Retail Solutions Providers Association. RSPA is North America's largest community of retail technology VARs, software providers, vendors, and distributors in the retail, restaurant, and grocery verticals. To accelerate your success through an RSPA membership, email membership@gorspa.org. Also, we want to say thanks to these channel-focused companies who support the RSPA community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our gold sponsors are Blue Star, CoCard, Epson, Global Payments, and ScanSource. And then finally, we're going to talk about this a little bit more with Andy in a bit. Registration is now open for Retail Now 2026, the Retail IT Channel's #1 trade show, education conference, and networking event. This year's event is set for July 26th through 28th at Caesars Forum Conference Center in Las Vegas. For info, visit gorspa.org/retail now. Retail now is where the industry meet. So one more leadership question for you, Andy. Who were some leaders that you've looked up to as mentors? And I'm curious, what have they done to help shape you and help you shape your leadership approach?
Yeah, you're putting me in a tough spot here, Jim, because I've had a lot of great mentors and people that I've worked with over the years that I have a lot of respect for. So I feel like I'm not going to do justice to some of them by even answering this question. But there's been so many great leaders, and I'm very fortunate to work for an organization who does have a lot of great leaders. And I think it starts at the top. At CDW, when I was promoted to a director of sales at the time, I was on the sales side of the house. The final step of your interview or process of becoming a director was actually to meet with the CEO of the company, which we have today. We have about 15,000 employees.
Okay.
So to think that think about the scale of what that means and the commitment of time that our CEO is giving, to actually meet with anyone who's going to be considered part of the senior leadership team at the company. But it's important, and at the time it was a gentleman named Tom Richards, who was an amazing man. Unfortunately, passed away a few years ago. But great man, and his legacy lives on for sure at the company. And so many people were just heartbroken, and you could see it when we found out recently of his passing. But when I met with him and I sat down with him, first of all, he knew who I was, which in and of itself at a big company is something that's meaningful, right? But when we were talking, one of the things that stuck out in my head with him was, he said to me, he asked me, he's like, what questions do you have? Because I could ask you questions all day. He's like, but at the end of the day, he's like, I honestly learn more about someone from the questions they ask me than the answers they give me. And I think it's a great point because it gives you insight into, how someone thinks and what they're thinking about and what's important to them. And so it's a little thing, but I think it's worth mentioning because he was a super insightful guy. And Chris Leahy took over after him. She's our current CEO. And, when I think of Chris, she is someone who knows every leader in the company. And same thing, she wants to meet with every new director, continuing on with that legacy of just, it gives that a feeling of a small business to a very large organization. And I could walk into Chris's office and have a conversation with her, anyone within the company. She knows every one of the senior leaders of the company, and by senior director and above, which again, it's in a 15,000 person company. It's a big number. Mm-hmm. And I think it's admirable that she takes the time to get to know everyone. And not only that, my wife met her and she actually knew my wife. She remembered my wife the next time she saw her. And I think it just goes back to that knowing people, and that human side of the business that makes you feel a connection to the business. But I've had so many, earlier back in my career, there's a gentleman named Bill Reed that I'd probably be remiss for not mentioning. He was one of my sales directors when I was a young sales manager, and he would start every day. We'd start with 30 minutes in his office, just kind of sitting down and having a cup of coffee together and talking about, leadership, talking about the business. Bill wound up leaving the company many years later and became a professor of leadership, actually, I think down at University of Phoenix, if I'm not mistaken. But just a great guy that would, take the time to invest in every morning and just talking through leadership, talking through the business and how to do things. And so many people along the way, good friends of mine that I would just, work with. And I think the common thread really, as I look back at a lot of those leaders, it really is the connection that they made with their people. And that people were willing to follow them because of that personal connection that they would make and how they would connect. And they all felt that, they were cared by, that their leader cared about not only the business, they weren't just a number, but also cared about them. Our current senior vice president of sales, Aletha Noonan, we had a conversation recently where she was talking about what she looks for in a leader. And there was a couple of different things on there, and I won't go through the whole list for the sake of time, but two of the things that she said that kind of stuck with me was, first of all, are they a good person? I don't want someone working for me that's not a good person, and I think it ties into a lot of the things that we've talked about, already. And the other one that I thought was really meaningful was never be too important. Be willing to do what you need to do to get the job done, and never be too important to do any level of the work, that's required along the way. And I think it's a viewpoint worth sharing, because I think that is important. And that's, I'm always willing to jump in and help out any way I can. And I think it goes back to that exact point that she made, and not for the reason that she made that point, but I think it just resonated with me because it's true.
Yeah, you can't be jumping in all the time, but look for opportunities where you can jump in. Never be like, no, it's not my job, or that's in my rearview mirror of my career.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel the need to apologize to a lot of other people that I'm not mentioning, because there's so many people that I could call out, but I don't want to make this a Grammy speech.
Well, I was going to say, this is like getting an Oscar. The music starts playing. Like, I can only thank so many people at that time. But it sounds like if there's a through line, because we're going to ask about your Retail Now presentation, which takes a hard shift from leadership into enterprise buyers. But it sounds like the through line through all of this is, as a leader, you've got to genuinely care about people. Like, it all starts there, and then everything else will flow into place. But if you're just looking to get ahead, or if you're just concerned about the bottom line, like, you're going to miss out on what it is. That kind of sounds like is a big thread of what you've been talking about with us.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I don't want to downplay, the need to have performance, right? And the need to hit a number, and the need to, have that accountability and execution, expectation. But at the end of the day, I agree. I think it's about the people, and that's how you get to that number, right? I think it's hugely important that you make those connections, and that's how you elevate the game.
Yeah. And push them outside their comfort zone, right? Like, that's the thing about genuinely caring about people. Here at the RSPA, we've done something for the past couple of years. It's a leading conversations boot camp, and it's for women who want to get better at, public speaking and presentations. We make them go through a lot of practices, and they're outside of their comfort zone. But at the end of it, they're like, I actually built up a skill, and I have genuine confidence in this. So it's not just like, hey, you're going to be great. Like, you make people work for it, but that's genuinely caring about them, because you want them to. You look back on your own career, Andy, right? You had people who pushed you outside your comfort zone and helped you build the skills. That's truly caring about somebody.
Absolutely.
Great. So let's talk about your Retail Now breakout again. The title is What Enterprise Buyers Need from VARs and ISVs. So I don't want to have you spoil the whole 45-minute breakout session, but what's one or two things you want to share with our audience about what VARs and ISVs, what enterprise buyers need from them?
Yeah, when I think about this session, Jim, really, I was working with Kate from ELO.
Kate
was amazing, and does a lot of great work with RSPA and the channel in general. And we were just talking about RSPA and Retail Now, and it's a great event, but you have a diversity of different types of people attending it, right? We talked about how different CDW is, and you have some smaller VARs, you have ISVs there, and they all have different needs, right? But at the end of the day, what I said to Kate is, the one thing that I feel that everyone always needs and everyone will benefit from is the perspective of the customer. There is no side of any person that's at this show that doesn't benefit from hearing directly from a client about what's important to them. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what we're going to focus on in this session, is hearing directly from some folks that are working in the retail industry or recently worked in the retail industry. I don't want to, kind of spoil anything, we might include some of my team members. We might have some people that were flying in directly, out of the retail space to speak on a panel with us. But ultimately, we're going to be talking with them about what's important to them, what technology trends, what are the business drivers, what's important to them in, the companies they work with, right? And how can we help all of those that are at the show work better with the retail industry? And that's really what the goal of the show is, or of the session, I guess, on the show for that matter too.
Sure. Yeah, but it sounds like from a different perspective, where oftentimes we're talking about how we can serve them better, but hearing directly from those buyers or former buyers, right? You said folks who have a lot of experience in that space, but they're working for you right now. They're going to be able to say, here's what works and here's what doesn't work, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't going to be a session about CDW at all, right? We're not there to sell CDW's brand. We're there to help everyone that's at the show understand the mind of a retailer and how to work better with them, how to add more value to ultimately, accelerate their business.
Excellent. I'm looking forward. Last question for you today, Andy. We've covered a ton. What would be your final advice for our audience? Let's say you're at retail now and you need to take a 3-minute ride share to get from where you are to the airport or something like that, and you're sharing an Uber with a VAR or an ISV leader, and they're like, Andy, you've been in this industry for a while. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think one for me that drives a lot of what I do is always be curious. And keep an open mind, right? The industry has changed so much from when I started to where I am today. The technology that we're talking about, the use cases we're talking about weren't even in the back of my mind, 31 years ago. And so I'm the kind of person who always loved learning new things. I love reading and just constantly, evolving. And that's part of what I found super enjoyable about this career that I didn't expect, coming into it. And so I think that's really important because things change so quickly. If you don't maintain that curiosity that we all have when we're younger, you're going to get left behind. So always keep that. And then I think, some of the things going back to the things that we spoke about those leadership, traits and what's important, that be a good person, never being too important. And always find a way to help, right? People come to me all the time and they'll ask about something. Maybe it's related to what I do, maybe it's not. But I try to find a way to help and add some value, even if I'm not the right person or I can't necessarily do exactly what they're looking for. How can I help? What can I do to get you closer to your end goal? It could be as simple as pointing them to another person who could answer that question. Maybe it's me doing something that's not really my role, but I'm happy to kind of help. And so I think it's really, everyone needs a hand, everyone needs a coach, everyone, no one does this alone, right? Or yes. Very few people do it. I think, that there might be a few exceptions to that, but very rarely. And so I think we all, have an obligation to help the person next to you, help the person that needs that hand. And I don't want to sound like I'm this altruistic, preaching person, because that's the way this session feels like it went. But at the end of the day, it is, right. Everyone needs a hand, and everyone's hopefully trying to get better and do the right thing. And so I believe that, we have an obligation to help the other people in our lives to be better people and be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the secret sauce of the Retail IT channel. It's not, I'll help you if you can help me, right? Like, it's not some transactional thing. It's, well, I know a rising tide lifts all boats. I've had so many people generously share their insights and wisdom with me, and so I'm happy to share it with everybody, if I'm understanding that correctly. Again, you and I have been in this space for 3 decades at this point, so we've seen a lot of the same things. That kind of sounds like what you're saying here. Like, that's really the key to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, some people could ask, why, as working at CDW, why would I want to help other VARs, be successful, right? But the reality of it is that this market is so big, and the market is so big, yet the industry is so small. So I think that you don't know what paths are going to cross in the future. You don't know what's going to change. And there's plenty of business for us all to go around as long as we're ethical about how we approach our business. There's no reason that we can't compete on business and still be friends and still help each other and within boundaries.
Very well said. Well, that does it for this episode of The Trusted Advisor. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to the RSPA YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. Before we go, big thanks again to Andy Szanger for sharing his wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RSPA Marketing Director Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the retail technology ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, please visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.